is step 11. As we say, step 11 is one of the great pillars of the steps of our program. But before we get to, each week we do a review and get into the specific step that we're going to talk about. And we begin at the first step in talking about what is the problem. And we say this is the foundation of recovery, and this is the greatest information that I've had as an alcoholic, is to be able to understand the exact nature of my problem. For many years I had a problem and I didn't understand it. As I realize today that AA is about the only place where we can find out, really what our problem is. I tried many solutions, but I didn't understand my problem. When I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, they show me the exact nature of my problem. And they said it is twofold. I had a physical problem, a physical allergy to alcohol. And I learned that, the word allergy is an abnormal reaction. Something occurred in me that doesn't occur in the average temperate drinker. And that's the only thing, an allergy is what is abnormal, that I was an abnormal drinker. And I didn't never understand that I was an abnormal drinker because I was abnormal all my life. And abnormal was really normal for me. And whenever I took a drink, something occurred in me. And from the very first drink, I remember, every time I took a drink, I had a desire or a physical craving for another drink. And when I would, and the more I drank, since it was caused by alcohol, the more I drank, the more I craved. I wanted to drink harder after 10 drinks than I did after one. And the phenomenal craving build and build and build, and every time I take a drink, it would go on and on and on, and I got in a lot of trouble. My life was unmanageable. So, this was a problem, and this was just half of my problem. And quite naturally, if you're allergic to something, the same answer is the same. Dr. Silkworth says, if we'll never put alcohol in our system, we will never experience the craving of alcohol. And it's easy. If you don't take the first drink, you'll be all right. That's simple. That's too simple for an alcoholic. I thought it was the 5th drink or the 10th drink, but it was the first drink. See what I mean? But later on, our book says that this is academic in a way. It is very important to know, but this is academic if we didn't take the first drink anyway. Our book also says, therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind, mental, rather than his body. This is a big part of the problem. And we now will be able to safely drink alcohol. But the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. Why do we take that first drink? And our book says we have an obsession. And we learn that obsession is an idea that overcomes all other ideas. And when the book says we become restless, irritable, and discontented, and we become a lot of other things. We really work at this. We get bored, and we get lonely, and we get uptight. And when these things become painful, then we will remember the sense and ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks of alcohol. We remember the ease and comfort of alcohol. Boy, do I remember in my mind the longing for the sense and ease and comfort that I knew would come into my life at once if I took a few drinks of alcohol. Every alcoholic knows that. You know what I mean? Those normal people don't know about it. That's why they say, why did you take a drink? I thought you quit. See, but they don't know about that sense and ease and comfort that we get. And if they did, they would be reaching for a few too. But we get something that they don't get, and they don't need. Maybe, we don't know. But the longing for that sense and ease and comfort in the mind makes us reach out and pick up a few drinks of alcohol, put it into our system. And as soon as the alcohol hits the system, it becomes a physical allergy. The physical allergy is triggered, and we go through the well-known spree, as the doctor said. We're emerging with a firm resolution not to drink again, and he said this is repeated over and over again, over and over and over and over and over for about 16 years of my life. Always going to quit. Merry-go-round gets smaller, smaller, smaller. And the doctor says that unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, he leaves the body and goes to the mind. There is little hope for his recovery. Yeah. And the second step shows us the solution. It says, come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And it's quite obvious. And we really get the second step off of the first step. By looking at this information, we can develop the second step. Since we don't know anything, medical science or no one else can treat the allergy. Dr. Silkworth says maybe one day they will. But at this point today, we don't really know that. We don't know anything about it, so we can't do anything about the body. So the solution must lie within the mind. And since the physical allergy is not the main problem anyway, the solution would be over here in the mind. This is the main problem. And since we're powerless, the solution is power. Restore us to sanity. It talks about power working in the mind. If this power could remove this obsession, then we could live with the allergy to alcohol, because we would never take the first drink. So the second step talks about a solution to the problem. And then if that's the case, if we know that the solution is power and that the problem is powerless, then the next thing is then the main purpose of the book is starting from 3 to 12 is how to find that power. You know, we have a planned program of finding that power. A little step-by-step program in which it says that it's guaranteed that everyone who has taken this, who has followed this plan, never ever seen anybody fail that has followed this plan, that the only thing that a 12-step promises this is a spiritual awakening. These steps will awaken us. Therefore, finding this power which will overcome the powerlessness. These steps are designed to do that. So we're in step 3, and quite naturally it's based on 1 and 2. If you have 1 and have 2, then you have a decision. Decision means to cut facts in two. And there are only 2 facts in the alcoholic's life. Of course, before I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had many things I wanted to do. You know, I could say, well, I could get my wife back, I'll be all right, I could move to California. I had a lot of decisions to make. An alcoholic is, decisions kill alcoholic. I heard a guy tell a story about this guy, one of my favorite stories, about the guy who had a job working out in the field digging potatoes. And it was a back-breaking job. And he would, how you just couldn't hardly stand up after them potatoes all day. But the guy was good, and the boss watched him, and he saw that this guy was a real good worker. You know, he didn't goof off, he worked. And so finally one day they came into the shed, and they asked him, they said, you're a good worker. I'd like to keep you around. So I'm going to take you out of the fields, and I'm going to put you in a potato house. And you won't have to pick up any potatoes no more. All you got to do is sit on this stew, and as the potatoes come by, put the big ones over here, the little ones over here, and the rotten ones over here. And he said, that's good. So this guy worked there. He didn't work for about an hour. He called the boss back. He said, look, I would like to have my job back in the field. The guy said, well, you mean you don't like this job in here, sitting down, sorting the potatoes, better than being out there in the field? He said, I'd rather be out there in the field because these decisions is killing me. And that's sort of the way it is with an alcoholic, These big decisions. We have some alcoholic has a big decision, and honestly, he has never seen the truth. Once he sees the truth in the first step, he don't have that many decisions. He don't have but two alternatives in his life. So he doesn't have to go to California. That ain't even one of his decisions. He has two alternatives. He can continue as he is, step one, insanity or death, or life on a spiritual basis. Those are only two alternatives that a real alcoholic has. And once we make that decision in step three, then we have to go to work to carry out this decision in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. These are the action steps that carry out the decision. Step three is but a decision. It says it would have no permanent effect. So we go to work in step 4 to remove the things that block us off from this power. And it talks about, we went through and we inventoried resentments, fears. We inventoried our sex conduct of the past and the people we had harmed. Then in step 5, we talked about this to another individual and got to the exact nature of the problem. Step 6, we became willing to let go. And step 7, we asked God to remove it. And then step 8 and 9, we went out and repaired the damage done in the past. You know, the harm that we have done to others. And these things are, the guilt and all this stuff is in our minds. And once these things are gotten out of the way, then after step 9, we have the promises of the book. You know, we will know a new freedom. It talks about a personality change sufficient to recover. It takes place gradually, as we can see, as we take these steps. You know, as an alcoholic, you know, I could stop drinking. Any alcoholic can stop drinking. In fact, I could tie you to one of those trees out there and you stop drinking real quick. Or you go, if you want to stop drinking, go out there and slap one of them policemen. You'll stop real quick, you know. But, you know, that's no big deal. But you know, just to stop drinking, but I couldn't change my life. I was still the same person. I still had the same things going on. And these steps bring up, we have already stopped drinking, but these steps bring about a gradual personality change as we take these steps, sufficient to recover from alcoholism. And after we have worked on self and worked on our minds in 4, 5, 6, and 7, worked on our spiritual life in step 3, worked on our relationship with God in steps 8 and 9, then we have the promises of the book, because the personality change is sufficient. It's beginning to take place after step 9, even though we're just halfway through at this point. And once we have these promises, then in step 10, we continue to work on our personality. We continue each day, as we talked about last week, on a day-to-day basis, watching for self. We watch for resentments, we watch for fears, and when these things crop up, you know, we ask God to remove them. We discuss them with someone else immediately, and we make amends if we have harmed anyone. And through working step 10 on a continuous basis, we continue to work on our personality, continue to having a change. And I think the exciting thing about Alcoholics Anonymous, we can constantly change and change for the rest of our lives. And we can grow based on what we're willing to do. And then after we have done that for a while, for a period of time, with step 10, now we have done a lot of work. Step 3 was a decision. Steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 were action steps. And really, step 10 was just a continuation of the process of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And as we practice this over, we refine the personality and we grow. Now, after we have grown to a point, then this brings us to step 11. And step 11 is really one of the pillars of the steps. As we said, you know, as we take the steps 1 and 2, brings us to 3. And then the steps kind of, you know, it talks about the bridge, and I like to look at this as a bridge. And the real pillars of this thing is, to me, is 3 and 11. 3 is a decision based on 1 and 2 to turn over our will. Clear away the things that block us from decision And in step 11, we receive God's will. So the simplicity is these two things. The changing of directions. Changing our lives is based on changing directions. You know, you can't use the same directions and go to a different place. That's obvious. If you want to go to a different place with your life, that's what we share here at the birthday, we have to change directions. So tonight, if we have worked these steps, made this decision, took these actions, now we should be able to receive God's directions in our lives. And step 11 is a tool, you know, to do this, to receive God's directions. It says through prayer and meditation. And simply, prayer and meditation is simply the ability to listen and to talk and to listen to God, who is within us, by the way. We talked about that. Remember we said earlier, God is within man. You know, this is nothing new to any of us that's been there all our lives. All of us have a conscience. All of us have, some of us may call this a soul, some of us may call this an inner intelligence or guidance or whatever we choose to call it. But we all know, you know, we didn't have to read no great books to find right from wrong. I've always had a sense of directions within my life. Either before I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was there. Now that I know what it is. You know, they said God is within man. And I've always known right from wrong. You know, I've never told a lie that I didn't know I was lying. I really did. I always. You know, you don't lie by accident. You know, I've always known, but I've always known what was right. But being an alcoholic, you know, I'm a selfish, self-centered person. Been all my life. Right and wrong was never my problem. You know, I always knew right from wrong. But an alcoholic, he has three things. If it was right and wrong, we'd be saints. But an alcoholic has right and wrong and what I want to do. And what I want to do seems to always win. See me? But if I could get rid of self, if I could get rid of what I wanted to do, then right and wrong, I could handle. But I could never handle that. See me? Because what I wanted to do damn near killed me. But I always knew right and wrong. But it was a biggie up there, what I wanted to do. And that is self. So tonight, as we talk about this, it says prayer and meditation. And I've never known, and I'll talk about this, I've never known an alcoholic that wasn't good at prayer. Prayer kind of goes along with a good alcoholic. You know, if you're an alcoholic like I was, you do a lot of praying. You know, because we're getting a lot of situations, you know. I use prayer as an emergency situation, mostly like medicine. I took it when I was sick. But this talk, in this book tonight and in the 11th step, it gives us this tool to use to fashion a life of prayer and meditation. You know, after all, as we have made this decision and got rid of self-will, then there's only two wills on the face of this earth. You know, the will of God and the will of man. And the only way, you know, in our life, in the human life, God gave this thing self-will. He gave it to man. And only we can make the decision to get rid of it. And as we clear away the things that block us off, we find that God's will is already within us. My book said it's been there. It's been covered up by calamity, pomp, and worship of other things. And now through step 11, it's to awaken this thing. And it's not an overnight matter. You know, it takes practice. It takes daily work at prayer and meditation, you know, to really make it strong enough and vital in the human life. And only we can do this. We get what we work for. It begins a little bit over on page 5. It says, is it easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels? For we are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. You know, you can't rest with this thing. You're going to have to grow continuous for the rest of your life. You know, we alcoholics, I think one of the greatest things that defeats us in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is our complacency. There's really built-in complacency in our program. You know, we who have had a lot of problems in our lives, a lot of trouble in our lives, and there's these things, as we work our program in our early days and our lives get better, you know, it's really natural to stop. You know, it's easy to work when you first come into the program. It's really easy to work this program when you don't have a job and you're broke and everything's gone to hell. Yeah, but we get the wrinkles out of our stomach and we get the car back, you know, and all these other things. When you get good, it's kind of hard to work these steps. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It really gets hard. And so these are it's really the goodness or the greatness or the quality of the program that really stops us from growing. And many of us will never see, you know, we can only grow through pain. We don't grow through good things that happen in our lives. But as we practice these things on a daily basis, and he talks about, you know, what do we do? Every day we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. You know, we must carry, and that's that spiritual vision that comes through step 11. As we receive God's direction, we must carry that vision into all our activities every day. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These thoughts must go with us constantly. Constantly. Not just when we're in trouble. So we can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It is the proper use of the will. And finally, we have our will back. There is a proper use of will to carry out God's will in our lives. You know, we've been using self-will as a disruptive force. Now he tells us how we should be using it. Much has already been said about receiving strength and inspiration and direction from him, who has all knowledge and power. We have talked about this all through the step. If we have carefully followed directions, if we have carefully followed these 10 directions, and that's what they are. There are 10 directions that other people have followed. If we have carefully followed those, we have begun to sense the flow of his Spirit into us. We have already begun to sense that, and we haven't come to 11 yet. To some extent, we have become God conscious already. We have begun to develop the vital sixth sense. And I think you know how subtle the book is. It talks about the sixth sense. And you know, we human beings have a life here on the face of this earth, and basically we have 5 senses in which to retrieve data to run our lives. You know, we can see, we can hear, we can taste, we can touch, and we can smell. That's about the only connections we have outside of us. You know, we got a brain. All of us got somewhat of a brain. I don't know, but the brain's up here in this box. It does all the the data, right? But it's back here in this box, and we have to feed it information, right? It's pretty good, but it's based on the information it gets. Right? And that's what we see and hear, and what we smell and taste and feel. We feed into it, and it tells us how to respond and react, right? And we rely on those 5 senses, right? But the book says there is a 6th sense of directions in each and every individual. That's the one we've been cut off from. You know, that's the one we have blocked out. That's the one we have worked these steps to get down to tonight. Now we want to awaken that inner sense of directions. You know, we said earlier, we can call it what you want to call it. Some people call it their inner intelligence. Some people call it their conscience. Some people call it their soul. Whatever you want to, it's that inner self. That thing that tells us and directs us, that tells us when we're wrong, and that same thing they say, you shouldn't do that. That's it. I don't know, you can call it what you want to. But now to awaken that sixth sense and to train it and use it. You know, I never used a prayer meditation as a tool. And I think it's one thing Bill said, it was one of the most, he said this is one of the single most important things that he learned out of the whole program. And that's saying a lot. The ability to use prayer and meditation to receive God's will, directions into my life. That is a powerful tool. Now, as he said, rather than to use it as he did in the past. Now, and this is the way I always used it. I never used prayer and meditation as two tools that complemented each other. I used it prayer by itself. I used prayer by itself to sway God's will, as Bill said, and list my petty needs. You know what I mean? It didn't work. But I always try to con God, you do this and I'll do that. You know what I mean? But I never, and I use God to fetch things for me. I need this, give me this and give me that. You know what I mean? I had a bellboy, bring me this and bring me that and bring me that. But never did I use God to direct my life. And that is the single most thing that I needed. So these two things is to use together it's just like a telephone. You can have a telephone with just a speaker in and no earpiece, you're in bad shape. You can't do a lot of business. You really can't. You ought to try that. So these things complement each other. Prayer and meditation. The first thing he tells us to do is at night. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. We stop, do this at night. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonesty? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should have been discussed, with another person? And we can see other steps. Did we miss step 5 today? You know what I mean? How were our shortcomings? Well, we review each day and we ask God's forgiveness and require what corrective measures should have been taken. And as we go, it don't take very long, at night. We can sit down and look at our day, and there are two wills on the face of this earth. And I can look at my life today and I can see, well, what today was God's will in my life? And what was self-will? You know what I mean? And I can see resentments, I see fear, I see all of the things that come out of self. And as I review my day, I see some of the things that come out of God's will. I can see God's will working in my life, and I can see self-will. No day has been the same. Some days more on one side, some days more on the other. And I look at my life every day. If you look at your life, you got to get better by doing this, because you're going to learn more and more about yourself. And it just takes just a few minutes to stop each night to do this. And we see what corrective measures can be taken. Y'all never had a perfect day. Never had a perfect day. And then he talks about what do we do when we get up. It says, on awakening, let us consider our 24 hours ahead. We alcoholics, I always think about my sponsor, one of the old guy sponsors I had. And he said, get up in the morning and get your life together. Look at things. He said, you're just like a damn duck. An alcoholic just like a duck. He said, you get up in the morning, you squawk and you crap in the middle of the road and say, here I come, world. Just flop out there and the world bats you around. Alcoholic don't have no organization in his life. You know what I mean? I don't, you know what I mean? Get up in the morning and get yourself together. You think about the 24 hours in the head. We ask God to direct our thinking. That's, especially to be divorced from self-pity. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental facilities with assurance, but after all, God gave us brains to use. We alcoholics, I'm great. We got great minds. I was telling the guys today, I always tell alcoholics, think about your mind. Just think what a great mind you have. And then look at your life. Is your life as good as your mind? Mine isn't. You know what I mean? There are certain things that block me off from really using my mind. When my thinking is clear to wrong motives, then I can use my brains. And we got great brains, you know what I mean? But we alcoholics, we get into this garbage. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when we were thinking as clear to the wrong motives. And I remember, this is true in my life. I remember, and I first sobered up, and I had a little problem one day. And I tell you, I remember the Pacific time. I don't remember what the problem was, but it wasn't much, because I couldn't have handled much. I hadn't been sober for about a couple of months. And instead of acting like a child and getting off in one of these huffy moods and running from it, I went and handled the problem like an adult. And I remember I felt so good. I thought my way through the thing instead of responding to it like with a bunch of emotions. And immediately I had after that was over, I had a funny thought. I said, boy, that was fun. That's really fun being an adult and handling problems. And the next thought come to my mind, boy, I wish I had another problem so I could do that again. That's fun, But for the first time, I had been able to respond to life that I remember as a situation like an adult. You know what I mean? And this come through the working on the other steps. Now, so in the morning, we get our thoughts together. And those are 2 things, those are 2 points. At night and in the morning, we can all do that. And I think it's great, to ask God to direct our lives and to have this is a positive spiritual life. To ask God before the day to invite Him into our lives. I never did that. The only way I try to use prayer before in my life, I got up in the morning and then did exactly what I wanted to do all day long. Raised all kind of hell, made all kind of a mess, and then at night I stopped in about 5 seconds and said, forgive me, and jumped in bed. I didn't, that's a negative. It really didn't work for me. So, regardless to what we have done in the past, we're talking about fashioning some new ideas, some definite and valuable suggestions into our everyday spiritual life. Now, sometime through the day, we're going to face indecisions. And we do. Every day in my life, I face things every day right today that I don't have answers for. After all, I'm just one little individual. I've been on the face of this earth for a short period of time, and will be in the expanse of time. This is a very complex world in which we live. You know what I mean? And you see a lot of people say they know it all, and you better watch out for one of those. Because when you know it all, boy, you're in trouble. We're very limited, regardless to who we are. We have a very limited knowledge of this world and the circumstances of it. And all I have is my little few years of experiences and the things that happened to me and the few things I've learned. And so sometimes each day something may come up that I don't have the answers for. When I run into a problem, I go into my little computer, and it's very limited. We've got some limited information, and I run through the tapes, and most of the time the tapes will say, we don't have the information, we don't know that. It don't take it about a second, and they shut off, and they go, flip, 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 that's it, And I say, go through again. I run it through, and it says, flip, 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 flip. Well, what you do, the book says, that's frustrations. You know what I mean? Realize you don't know. It says, relax and take it easy. Then I plug into another computer from within. I have a source of knowledge. God has knowledge of all things. In God, all things are possible. There is some information within. It's within me. Within me, I have 2 sets of directions. If I can shut mine off, I can plug in to God's directions. And God knows all. God has 10,000 answers to every problem I have. But He will allow me the ability to wrestle with it on my himself if he wants to. He's not going to meddle into it. As soon as I can turn it over to God, relax and take it easy and don't struggle, right from within, not out in the air. A lot of times I get the right answer. Something will say something to me. Why don't you call Nancy? Why don't you call Carol? Why don't you talk to Bill about that? Later on, see, I put that down, go on and do what I can. I can at least go out and cut the grass because I ain't worrying about that problem anymore. I done turned it over. Right from within, a lot of times God speaks to me through another person. See me? Because God is within other people, just like He's within me. You know, and I can listen to other people today. You know, I used to couldn't listen to other people. But today I can listen to other people. And God comes from strange people. And sometimes it's not from the people who I'm looking up to. It may be some person I'm unsuspected. And they tell me, they give me the answers. And the answers will come after we try this for a while. So God can direct our lives. And He said, what used to be a hunch, we always have hunches, or occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of our minds. And when we and after a while, we'll rely on this. At first, our book says, still being inexperienced, we're going to have trouble. This is not an overnight matter if you knew. But as you begin to practice this step day in and day out over a period of time, you will find that you can make this work at all times. Then you can stand and face the world as a successful person. You know, I don't have all the answers, but I have access to answers. You know, right from within, I know God has all these answers. So as we use this, this is a definite and valuable suggestion. Now, as we move on into this, he teaches us how to pray. And I think this was, how do we pray? And we all have an individual conception of God. We all have an individual spiritual lives. God contacts through our most innermost selves. But, I had to really, in a way, lay aside my old concepts because they hadn't worked anyway. I had developed a new direction, new prayer life. And my book tells us, that we don't ask God for all the things. My prayers used to be like a list of Santa Claus. God, do this, give me this, give me this, give me this, give me that. If you do this, I'm going to do that. And and it says there's nothing wrong except a waste of time because it won't work. Waste of time. It's a waste of time. Come in. And there's no need I have to ask God for anything because I know God knows my every need. There's no way I could exchange today a list of things I want for the things that God wants me to have. The list for what God wants me to have far exceed my imagination. And my little list could not compare. And I think if I could go back to 1962 in my life, I could go back to when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I could see, I just imagine the list that I would have made. And boy, if God had did those things in my life, and it would cut me off from all the things that God has given me, how small my life would have been. God's gift for us is greater than anything that we can imagine. So we don't have to list what we want. We're not going to get it anyway because some of the things we want is going to hurt us. God is going to, all we have to do is pray for God's direction in our lives. And I had a lot of problems and as I say, my prayers, I had to fashion a new prayer life, and I always tell the story of how my prayer life began. I was raised in a Southern Methodist church. I didn't go to this. Got a friend of mine who always talks about the Southern Baptist church. He went to the Southern Baptist, but them Baptists will drown you. I went to the Methodist church. I always was scared of water, But we had a brother in our church, and I always talk about this step 11. As a kid, and I remember here peculiar to pews. I remember the pew that I sat in. And we sat over near the edge, and he sat near the center. And we had to be in that pew every Sunday morning. I mean, you had to be there. Sunday we just all day in that church, And Brother Sanders used to pray every Sunday morning, and I remember him in a brown suit. He always had the same brown suit. And he had a watch bob that on a chain, and it was fascinating, but it was a pretty chain, and there was a red stone in it, and I could always see it bobbing off of his vest as a kid looking down at him praying. And he would always get down. When he started praying, he would ask God for everything in heaven. It took him about a half hour to pray for us. We were in bad shape. And he would say, God, give us this, and God, give us that, and God bless the preacher, and God bless the preacher's wife, and God bless the ladies' aid, and the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, and the auxiliary, and the number one circle, and do this, and do this, and do this. He had with great detail. And he said the president, and the vice president, and the Senate, everybody, the police, and the mayor. And God do this to stop the war and get the Chinese boy. Okay. And then he went on about a half hour, and then he would give God all kinds of directions, And here I am just learning from him. That's the way I learned. And then his final statement was, Lord, that in our haste we had omitted, please grant us that also. And after a half hour, this guy said, if we left out something, we want that too. Now, when you've been doing that for years, and that's your way of doing things. There's nothing wrong with it. But then we come to AA, and we have to fashion an AA prayer life, something simple, something to the point. We really don't need to waste our time listing our specific petty needs. Only thing we really need, because that blocks this flow, it blocks our communication. All we really need is one single thing. God's will in our lives, God's directions in our lives, and the power to carry that out. Now, once we have, it says throughout the book, it tells us what to do when we're in doubt at the bottom of the page. This is a beautiful exercise in our book. And if we practice these as suggestions each day, I guarantee anybody here that will practice these over a period of a few months, you will develop a healthy life of prayer and meditation that is good, that will work for you as good as anything you ever find in any human life. It will work through practice. These simple exercises on a day-to-day basis. Now he says, we alcoholics are undisciplined. We are undisciplined. So we let God discipline us on the way we have just laid out. If you look at your life at night, then and look at your life in the morning, and if you ask for God's directions throughout each day, using these tools, if you stop when you have indecision and let this thing work in your life at that time, when you have in doubt, if you stop and let it work in your life, and if you pray for God's directions each day in a simple way, then you will be having God's directions come in, and His directions will be discipline your life. Come in. Through God's directions, they come through these tools, they will direct and discipline our lives. We are undisciplined people. And as we practice this step, God begins to grow in our lives. Whatever we choose to call this thing within ourselves. We'll find that at each day that we can stand firmly and face life successfully. We find out we have answers. And we're not relying on self anymore. And we become to rely on this power. And once as these things become to work and we see the results of them, then we really develop faith. So once we have completed step 11 for all intent, the 11 steps, these 11 steps are, this is the final thing that comes into our life. It's all about self-will and God's will. And having received this is really the final, the icing on the cake. In step 12, it says, having received as a result of these steps, then now we're going to, this is a giving step. The first 11 steps we receive. And the 12th step, after we get it, then we have to give it away. We're going to grow through giving. The 11 steps is receiving steps, And giving away is a 12th step. But we said we cannot transmit, though. We can't give away what we haven't received. So next week we'll go into growing through giving away of what we received through the first 11 steps.